Hey guys, Mr. Klein here, and here we are with our last lesson of the chapter on the Fertile Crescent. We're talking about the Babylonians and Phoenicians, and we're going to talk about like several thousand years of history, lots of different people attacking each other and killing each other, and general craziness. So let's get going. So around 1800 BC, so about 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, a powerful city-state in the Fertile Crescent, known as Babylon, began to conquer surrounding areas. If you remember from our lesson on the Sumerians, the bigger the army, the bigger the city-state was. So Babylon at this time had a huge army. And the Babylonians, as they were known, were ruled by their greatest king. And by king we mean monarch. That's another way of saying it. And the Babylonians' greatest monarch was a guy named Hammurabi. Hammurabi led his army. That's this guy right here sitting and someone speaking to him. And as you can see, that's a version of cuneiform down here at the bottom. Hammurabi did all sorts of things for the Babylonian Empire. He oversaw many building projects, lots of statues to him, and he very much increased prosperity through his strong army, reducing raiders and crime, allowing people to trade freely and stuff within the empire and with other kingdoms. Now, that's good enough for a king, but if you want to be remembered in history, you need to do something important. And so Hammurabi is pretty much immortal in history because he's famous for his code, or the Code of Hammurabi, or Hammurabi's Code. And this is the earliest known collection of laws in history. Now, before then, you kind of knew what the rules were, but sometimes you didn't, and then you'd end up getting punished for it. Hammurabi, on the other hand, thought that the easiest way to deal with this was to make sure everyone knew the code. And so as you can see, this is a piece of the Code of Hammurabi, as you can see in cuneiform. And his code covered all aspects of life: marriage, theft, injury, loans, business dealings, all of this stuff. And the laws were public, and they were posted around the empire for everyone to see. Throughout the Babylonian Empire, in the city center, you had this big column. And this column had the entire code, all 280-something laws, with their punishments, too. And what was interesting was that the punishments really depended on what social class you were in. If you remember our lesson on the Sumerians, we talked about that social pyramid: the kings at the top, slaves at the bottom, priests below the kings, farmers above the slaves, and in the middle were the educated scribes and the writers and craftsmen. And depending on how high up you were in this whole social class, depended on your punishment. So you could kill someone, and if you were like a priest or something, you could pay a fine, but if you were below them, you'd be put to death. Caught stealing, you might lose your hand. Or you might have to pay a fine if you're a rich person. So even though it wasn't really fair, in a way it was fair because everybody, whether you were rich or poor, were held to a standard. Rich people were held at one standard, poor people held at another one, but everybody in the kingdom had to go under this standard, except for the king, of course. But that's what you get for being king. Now, he didn't last long, and that mainly has to do with geography. And if we look at the Fertile Crescent right here, this land, if I zoom in some, there we go, it's nice and flat, okay? Armies like nice and flat. If I were to zoom out some, out of the middle of nowhere desert, and if I were to go up north here into Russia, and then I go another hand, we see lots and lots of mountains, okay? Armies don't like fighting in mountains because the enemy can hide in valleys and stuff like that. You like flat land. And since the Fertile Crescent was so flat, you had armies fight over it for centuries. And so what we're going to talk about is the procession, or the parade of armies marching through the Fertile Crescent, killing everybody and taking over Babylon, because this became a really important city in the region. So after the Babylonians, the Mesopotamians were taken over by the Hittites from Asia Minor in around 1595 BC. The Hittites used advanced weapons made out of bronze, and were among the first civilizations to use a chariot, or a horse-drawn battle cart. And so here's an example of a chariot drawing made by the Egyptians. So what you had is you had three soldiers. You had one who would sometimes have a sword or a spear, a bow and arrow, one holding a spear, and then the other guy riding the chariot. And here's a depiction of the Hittites actually marching into Babylon, the soldiers behind them, the king on his chariot with his servants. There's archers and men on horseback there. So the Hittites overran, moved into Babylon, sat down, and made it their own. They ruled for 200 years. But after 200 years, another group called the Kassites came in, kicked them out of Babylon, killed them, moved in, and they ruled for 400 years themselves. The Kassites ruled over Babylon, and things went on in history, and sooner or later another group came in. And these groups were called the Assyrians, and the Assyrians were pretty brutal, and they conquered Babylon around 900 BC. But they did something different than all of these other groups, the Babylonians who started there, the Hittites, the Kassites, and even the Chaldeans, which we'll talk about in a second. The Assyrians actually didn't move into Babylon and take it over. They just kept it as a part of their empire. But they kept their capital in Nineveh. And there's two ways once you invade to take over a country. Either one, you take it over, kill everybody, and take all their stuff and take the town and make it your own. Or you collect taxes and you get the local rulers to rule for you. And you have their army fight and kill their own people so you can rule. So you either do the dirty work yourself or you pay for people to do that. And what would happen is if these leaders didn't get into line, the Assyrians would just send in their army and kill them and then take all their stuff. So the choice was either stay alive and pay taxes to the Assyrians or die to the Assyrians. And so these locals decided, you know what, it might be better if we stayed alive and served them. Now, in the year 612 BC, so after a couple hundred years of this, the Assyrians were kicked out of Babylon by the Chaldeans, which were a people from the Syrian desert. And these people, which let me zoom out from here real quick, out of Russia. If I can zoom out some. There we go. Okay, so if we zoom out from the middle of nowhere, Russia, and head south, we can go to the Syrian desert, this area right here. So out in western Iraq is where the Chaldeans came from. And so they came in, and they kicked out the Assyrians and made Babylon their own. Now, their most famous king was Nebuchadnezzar, which if you read your Bible, you'll know about him. You know about Daniel and his big statue and stuff. Nebuchadnezzar did more than that. He rebuilt Babylon into a beautiful city, including one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, which were his famous hanging gardens. And he revived Sumerian culture and cuneiform and advanced it and made advances in astronomy and math. So this is kind of summing up the Mesopotamian rulers. So we have the Babylonians, then who were replaced by the Hittites, who were then replaced by the Kassites, who were replaced by the Assyrians, and who were replaced by the Chaldeans. So these were the people who ruled the Fertile Crescent, at least the Mesopotamian part. And here's a picture of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, what ancient authors thought it actually looked like. Now, there's one more group of people we want to talk about, and that's on the western end of the Fertile Crescent, near modern-day Lebanon, was a kingdom named Phoenicia. So just to compare, let's head back to Google Earth one more time. Here is Mesopotamia right here, and here's Lebanon, and the Phoenicians were here. Now, if you notice, we have lots of land right here for farming and stuff. Lebanon in this area is bordering the Mediterranean Sea and all this stuff. So here's Greece, Italy's up here, Spain's over here, here's France. So rather than having a big land empire, you had all that water. So if you built boats and sailed around all over the place, you know, big ships like this, what you could do is instead of ruling through war, you could create a trading society. So you could rule through making money. So this is a contrasting here. Whereas all these countries moving through, people groups moving through Mesopotamia fought and killed each other, the Phoenicians said, well, I can just rule you by taking your money and you buy stuff from us and we can get rich that way. And so that's how the Phoenicians ruled. They ruled a huge area. Their trading ships traded goods throughout the Mediterranean Sea, through towns and colonies, and these even stretched into the Atlantic Ocean. And this is how big the Phoenician trade groups, they actually went on out into Africa right here on the Atlantic Ocean, and all these islands, including Carthage, which we'll talk later on about them. But the Phoenicians traded with the Greeks, through the Italians, the Spaniards, and all these guys. And all these little cities were Phoenician colonies where Phoenician people stayed and sold their stuff to the locals. And we talked about with the Sumerians and cuneiform, but the most notable invention by the Phoenicians was the alphabet, or a set of letters that can be combined into written words. So here's the basic Phoenician alphabet. Whereas cuneiform had the stamps with the reeds on clay tablets, the Phoenicians wrote, and these individual things were letters, and they were put together into words. And that's the most lasting impact of the Phoenicians, was not so much big buildings or statues or codes of law, but rather the alphabet, which evolved over the years and spread throughout the world through their trade to the modern alphabet we see today. So this ends up our chapter on the Fertile Crescent. So we talked about the Sumerians, we talked about the Babylonians, we talked about the Assyrians, the Hittites, the Kassites, and the Chaldeans, and we talked about the Phoenicians, who, rather than fighting through war, fought through trade. Now, as we go through our next chapters, we're going to go through other civilizations that sprung up around this time on different major rivers throughout the world, and we're going to compare and contrast those. So keep this stuff in mind, and of course, if you want to go back and you want to review this later on, please do so. And thank you for watching.